The second half of the 19th century is certainly the period of the Indian Renaissance. Those of you who are interested in the history of India would see that it is now that a lot of social reforms took place, educational reforms, and along with that, the flowering of literature in English from India. This period gave birth to the spread of English education, because of which many educated Indians got exposure to thoughts from the Western world. They were influenced and impressed by British poets and looked at the possibility of writing in the English language. Maybe a few writers have lived on today. To this date, their poems continue to be popular. Born as Toru Dutt, but better known today as Toru Dutt, 1856 to 1877. You can imagine how young she died. She was born into a well-known Bengali family. The father was a linguist and the mother had translated some poems from Bengali into English as well as from English to Bengali. Whatever may be the reasons, the family decided to convert to Christianity when Toru was quite a kid. And then they moved on to live in France and for a few years in England. She was influenced by French poetry and attempted to translate many French poems into the English language. The siblings, Toru and Aru, as well as their brother Abju, who died young. All of them died young, but Abju died very young. You know, the family went to live in England, and some of you may be aware that the English weather, the British weather, did not suit us Indians. Many of them fell prey to all kinds of diseases, and the same happened to Toru Dutt as well as her siblings. They came back to live in Calcutta, in West Bengal, but could not adjust to the very, very different kind of culture in which they had to live. Ironically, the weather of England didn't suit them, and the culture of Bengal didn't suit them, and they died very, very young. Her most important work is Ancient Ballads and Legends of Hindustan, a collection of poems from which the poem that we are going to look at now is being taken. Sita by Toru Dutt is one more poem which shows how Toru Dutt is interested in Indian themes, but attempts to write them with the English idiom. So Sita is a story that all of us are familiar with, but I must read this poem to you. 3 happy children in a darkened room. What do they gaze on with wide open eyes? A dense, dense forest where no sunbeam pries, and in its center a cleared spot. So the poem begins with somebody telling a story. Storytelling is so much a part of Indian culture, Indian tradition. So here we have a mother probably narrating a story to 3 children. The room is dark, so probably it's night time. So you know the bedtime stories. And how are their eyes? Wide open eyes. Because the mother probably is a wonderful storyteller. And as she's narrating the story, the curiosity of the children, it keeps increasing. So they are looking at, and what is the mother talking about? A dense, dense forest where no sunbeam pries, and in its center a cleared spot. So the poem begins with the mother telling the story And the mother is telling the story by describing the place. It's a forest, a dark forest, no sunbeam prize. And it goes on. There bloom gigantic flowers on creepers that embrace tall trees. There in a quiet lucid lake, the white swans glide. There, whirring from the brake, the peacock springs. There, herds of wild deer race. There, patches gleam with yellow waving grain. There, blue smoke from strange altars rises light. For almost 10 lines, the mother describes the scene. Sita is not in the palace of Ayodhya. She's somewhere in the forest. And as the poem goes on, we will see, because this now is Sita's second visit to the forest. You remember how Rama took her to the forest? Rama didn't take her. Rama sent her to the forest, remember, with Lakshmana, because somebody had commented that Sita probably is not pure anymore because she had spent her time with another man. This, of course, is a reference to Sita's stay in Sri Lanka, as we call it today, Ceylon of those days. Anyway, that's another story. But to come back to this poem, there's a beautiful description of the place, of the trees, of the flowers, of the creepers, of the animals. The mother goes on describing, and I'm sure the listeners, these little kids, get more and more interested. Now what's going to happen? And then the mother comes to the story. But there dwells in peace the poet anchorite. Now the poet anchorite, some critics suggest it's probably a reference to Valmiki, some suggest it's a reference to Toru Dutt, while others think it is Sita herself. But who is this fair lady? Not in vain she weeps, for lo, at every tear she sheds, tears from 3 pairs of young eyes fall amain, and bowed in sorrow are the 3 young heads. Remember, as I told you, this is Sita's second trip to the forest, the second time. And now she's pregnant, remember, and Lava and Kusha are going to be born in the forest. And as the mother is describing how sad Sita is to be here, the 3 kids also start crying. It's the beauty of the story. It is the ability of the storyteller. It is the grace of the poet by which we hear all this. It's an old story, and the lay which has evoked sad Sita from the past is by a mother sung. It is hushed at last. The story is over. The mother starts speaking, stops speaking, and then there is a silence. Is it because the children have fallen asleep? Is it because somebody else has come into the room? Maybe the father is back. We are not told what happens. But then the picture melts. And then the last 2 lines. Yet shall they dream of it until the day. When shall those children by their mother's side gather army as erst at eventide? Is there a note of sorrow in Toru Dutt's poem as she talks about Sita and the reaction of these kids, probably remembering her dear siblings? Because, as I mentioned, Toru Dutt's siblings died very young. And that is how the story ends. A sad story with sad listeners. And I'm sure we as readers too feel saddened. The poem is written almost in one long stanza. 22 lines continuously. Because remember, it's a story, it's narration. A short poem, a simple poem, a poem which evokes our emotions. I want to talk to you here only about one figure of speech, because most of the other figures of speech are so common that you probably don't really need an explanation about it. How about you spend some time hunting for the figures of speech here? Let me talk about a new figure of speech, which is paleology. Paleology is repetition for emphasis. And it happens in quick succession. For example, she talks about the dense forest. Why can't she just say dense forest? But she wants to emphasize how dense it is. So it's a dense forest. It goes on like that when she says an old story. So look at some other figures of speech maybe. Let me also draw your attention to a figure of speech called allusion. Not to be confused, as I've said earlier too, with illusion. Allusion is a reference, and here the obvious reference is to the Ramayana, to Valmiki, to Sita from the great epic. Gosh, one poem, Sita, and how I've been transported into the world of Indian mythology. How about trying to find more poems based on stories from the epics? The Ramayana and the Mahabharata are filled with stories which our poets have made good use of. And I'm not talking only about the English language. Do look at poems in most of our Indian languages, and you will find quite a treasury waiting for you there. Happy reading!